whine of the circular saw ripped through the quiet morning, a sound of violation that clawed at Elias Thorne's gut. He spun, dropping the sandpaper, the scent of fresh cedar suddenly acrid with dread. Marcus Briggs, the warden, as the old-timers called him, stood in his backyard, a smirk twisting his face. Behind him, two hulking figures in work overalls, not the usual HOA groundskeepers, were already tearing at the ribs of ITC Serpente, his father's old fishing boat, the very heart of his retirement. One of them raised a sledgehammer, aiming for the keel. "Stop!" Elias roared, his voice, usually calm, cracking with raw fury. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Briggs merely held up a laminated paper, a cruel glint in his eye. "Unapproved structure, Thorne. Immediate demolition order. Effective immediately." "Dantegang." The sledgehammer swung, splintering aged oak, and a piece of Elias's soul went with it. For 20 years, Elias Thorne had navigated the world's most dangerous environments. From the sun-baked streets of Fallujah to the frozen peaks of Afghanistan, his 20-year career as a Marine Corps explosive ordnance disposal specialist had taught him to remain calm under pressure, to assess threats with surgical precision, and to disarm the most volatile situations. But nothing in his extensive training, not the adrenaline of a live bomb, nor the chilling silence before an ambush, had prepared him for the insidious, soul-crushing tyranny of the Oakhaven Homeowners Association. Oakhaven, nestled on the rugged New England coast, was supposed to be his sanctuary. A town of weathered clapboard houses, salty air, and the distant cry of gulls. He and Clara, his wife of 30 years, had moved back to his childhood home after his retirement, seeking the quiet rhythm of the tides and the familiar faces of a community that had once felt like family. The house, passed down through generations, came with a small backyard overlooking the harbor, a perfect spot for ITC Serpent. The boat, a 20-foot wooden fishing vessel, was more than just a project. It was a lifeline. His father, a gruff but gentle fisherman, had taught him to tie knots on its deck, to read the currents, to respect the ocean. After his father's passing, the boat had sat, neglected, in a dusty corner of the yard. Elias had promised himself he'd restore it, piece by painstaking piece. The sanding, the varnishing, the careful replacement of rotted planks. Each task was a meditation, a way to channel the restless energy that still hummed beneath his skin, a remnant of the battlefields he'd left behind. It was his therapy, his connection to a past that felt increasingly distant. Then came the new HOA. Not the old sleepy board that had overseen Oakhaven for decades, run by local retirees and civic-minded volunteers. This was a new regime brought in by Victoria Sterling, the slick, impeccably dressed HOA president, a former corporate real estate attorney from Boston. Sterling had arrived 6 months ago, swiftly consolidating power, her sharp suits and even sharper legal jargon, a stark contrast to Oakhaven's relaxed charm. Her right-hand man, Marcus, the warden Briggs, was a hulking ex-private security contractor with a shaved head and eyes that missed nothing. He didn't wear a uniform, but his presence was a constant, unsettling reminder of their authority. Their stated mission was modernization and property value enhancement. Their real mission, Elias and Clara were beginning to suspect, was to make life so unbearable for long-time residents that they'd sell their homes at rock-bottom prices. Whispers of Azure Coast Resorts, a shadowy luxury developer, had started circulating. They wanted Oakhaven's prime coastal real estate, and the HOA was their wrecking ball. "This is an outrage," Clara cried, rushing out onto the porch, her usually warm face pale with shock. "You can't just destroy our property. We haven't received any proper notice." Ian? Briggs, unperturbed, held up another document. "Notice of violation, notice of intent to correct, final notice. All mailed last month. Section 3-722. Prohibition of unsightly or unapproved watercraft storage within residential lots. Your boat, Mr. Thorne, is an eyesore. It's a blight on the community. And now it's a liability." Elias stepped forward, His body coiled, the years of combat training asserting themselves. He could feel the familiar surge of adrenaline, but he forced himself to breathe, to assess. Briggs was big, but predictable. The two workers were just muscle, following orders. The real threat was the system they represented. "I'm Elias Thorne," he said, his voice now low, controlled, the tone he used to diffuse a nervous recruit or a panicked civilian. "I served this country for 2 decades. This boat is a family heirloom. It's being restored. It's not an eyesore. It's a piece of Oakhaven's heritage." "Non-Marine." Briggs let out a short, humorless laugh. "Marine, huh? Well, Marine, the HOA laws don't care about your service record or your sentimentality. They care about compliance. And your boat is non-compliant." He gestured to the workers. "Finish it." The sledgehammer came down again, smashing through the stern. Elias flinched, a sharp pain echoing in his chest. This wasn't just wood. This was memory. This was his father. He lunged forward, not to fight, but to intercept the next blow. "There's a process for this," he insisted, placing himself between the men and the boat. "A hearing. An appeal. You can't just—" "We can," Briggs interrupted, stepping closer, his bulk casting a shadow. "And we are. Unless you want to be cited for obstructing HOA personnel, which carries a fine of $5,000 and immediate eviction proceedings." His eyes, cold and flat, met Elias's. "You don't want to test us, old man. We've done this before." "Can?" The implicit threat hung heavy in the air. Elias knew he couldn't physically stop them without risking a far worse outcome. He saw the gleam of cell phone cameras from a neighbor's window. The Hendersons, who usually waved, were now hiding, recording. Fear. That was their most effective weapon. He swallowed the bitter taste of humiliation and stepped back, his jaw clenched, watching the destruction of his father's legacy. That evening the first official notice arrived. A $10,000 fine for non-compliance and obstruction of HOA duties, along with a demand for immediate payment and a threat of forced sale to cover the costs. Elias stared at the zeros, his mind racing. This wasn't about a boat. This was about making an example of him. "We have to fight this, Elias," Clara said, her voice shaking as she traced the jagged lines of the notice. "This is our home. Our family." "No." "I know, honey," he replied, his gaze distant. He was already running scenarios, just as he would before a dangerous mission. Identify the enemy. Understand their tactics. Find their weakness. His first call was to Sarah Chen, a tenacious young reporter for the Oakhaven Chronicle. Sarah had been sniffing around the new HOA for months, her articles hinting at corporate overreach and unexplained property sales. She arrived at their house an hour later, a notepad in hand, her eyes sharp and intelligent. "This isn't the first time," Sarah said, after Elias recounted the morning's events, her pen scratching furiously. "Old man Hemlock had his entire prize-winning rose garden dug up last month for improper landscaping. The Davises, they got fined for their kids playing too loudly, forced them to sell at a loss." She leaned forward. "And guess who bought both properties? A shell company called Coastal Holdings LLC. Registered address is a P.O. box in Delaware. But I've got a hunch it's connected to Azure Coast Resorts." "See, or?" Elias felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. "They're trying to clear us out." "Exactly," Sarah confirmed. "And the mayor's office, the zoning board, they're all rubber stamping everything Sterling puts in front of them. It's a well-oiled machine." And together, they began to pull at the threads. Elias, with his military precision, started documenting everything. Every violation notice, every suspicious vehicle parked outside, every strange maintenance crew. He set up discreet cameras, turning his home into a miniature surveillance post. He interviewed terrified neighbors, coaxing stories of harassment and intimidation. Sarah, meanwhile, delved into public records, unearthing property transfers, corporate filings, and campaign finance reports. The picture that emerged was stark. Victoria Sterling, under the guise of HOA president, was orchestrating a systematic campaign of harassment designed to devalue properties and force sales. The warden Briggs was her enforcer, using intimidation and veiled threats. And Mayor Randall Finch, a man who had once campaigned on preserving Oakhaven's charm, was taking hefty donations from Azure Coast Resorts, approving zoning changes that would transform the town into a luxury playground. But the most egregious revelation came when Elias and Sarah started looking into the town's most beloved landmarks. The historic Oakhaven Lighthouse, a stoic sentinel that had guided ships for over a century and served as a memorial to local veterans, was slated for renovation, a euphemism for privatization. And the public access to the pristine, windswept beach, a cherished community gathering spot, was to be restricted, sold off as exclusive beach club membership to the future resort. "This isn't just about our homes anymore, Elias," Sarah said, her voice tight with indignation, as they reviewed the zoning documents late one night. "This is about erasing Oakhaven. Erasing its history. Its soul." "Nee." Elias stared at the plans, a slow, burning rage simmering beneath his calm exterior. The lighthouse, a memorial to men like his father, who had served and returned to these shores, now threatened. The beach, where he'd learned to swim and fish. This was a direct assault on everything he held dear. His military training had prepared him to protect. Now, he had a new mission. "They think they're untouchable," Elias murmured, his eyes narrowing. "They've got the local government in their pocket. They've got the fear of the community on their side." He paused, a plan forming in his mind, precise and calculated. "But every system has a vulnerability, and we're going to find theirs." No. The psychological warfare intensified. The HOA sent weekly fines for absurdities. The precise shade of beige on their mailbox was deemed non-standard. The angle of their flagpole was aesthetically inconsistent. Even the type of seaweed that washed up on their small stretch of beach was deemed unapproved organic debris. Briggs' black SUV became a permanent fixture down the street, its tinted windows always facing their home. They endured mysterious power outages that only affected their house, and anonymous calls reporting suspicious activity to the police, who would arrive with a perfunctory knock and a dismissive shrug. Clara, usually resilient, started showing the strain. She woke at every creak of the house, her eyes shadowed. "I just want it to be over, Elias," she'd whisper, clutching his hand in the dark. "It will be," he'd promise, though he knew the fight was just beginning. He kept his own fear locked away, deep in the vault of his mind, alongside the memories of bombs and firefights. He was an EOD specialist. He disarmed threats. This was just a different kind of fuse. Their secret weapon arrived in the form of General Maxwell Harding, Elias's former commanding officer, now a respected U.S. attorney. Elias had made the call, laying out the methodical corruption, the systematic harassment, the land grabs, the threatened lighthouse. Harding, a man of quiet integrity and formidable legal prowess, had listened patiently. "This isn't just local politics, Elias," Harding had said, his voice grave. "This is a pattern. And if there's a pattern, there's a federal interest." The community meeting was announced, ostensibly to discuss the new Oakhaven revitalization plan. Victoria Sterling sat at the head of the long table in the old Oakhaven Community Hall, a smug smile playing on her lips. Briggs stood by the door, his arms crossed, a silent threat to anyone considering dissenter. The hall was packed, a mix of fearful residents and curious onlookers. Sterling began with a polished presentation, slides showing gleaming resort towers and manicured golf courses. "We are bringing Oakhaven into the 21st century, she purred, her voice dripping with corporate charm. "Enhancing property values, attracting investment, creating a vibrant future." Then, Elias Thorne rose from the front row. He wasn't wearing a suit, just a simple, pressed shirt and jeans, but his posture, his stillness, commanded attention. "Ms. Sterling," he said, his voice calm, cutting through the saccharine presentation. "May I ask a question about your revitalization?" Sterling's smile wavered. Of course, Mr. Thorne. Though I believe your family is currently under review for numerous violations. Nice. Indeed, Elias replied unfazed. Violations like restoring a family boat, which your enforcer, Mr. Briggs, saw fit to begin destroying without due process. He gestured to a small projector he'd quietly set up. But let's talk about real violations. Violations of trust. Violations of law. And no. He clicked a button. The screen flickered to life, displaying not resort blueprints, but meticulously compiled financial records. Spreadsheets, color-coded and annotated, showing shell companies, inflated contracts, and consulting fees funneled from HOA dues directly to accounts linked to Mayor Finch and Victoria Sterling. Your annual HOA fees, Elias explained, his voice steady, are not going to community improvements. They're lining the pockets of MSB. Sterling, Mr. Briggs, and Mayor Finch. He clicked again. Surveillance footage, grainy but clear, showed Briggs sneaking through backyards, planting violations, and even damaging property. Then came the damning emails, uncovered by Sarah Chen, discussing strategic property acquisitions and resident relocation incentives. The room erupted. Gasps, murmurs, then shouts of outrage. Sterling's face turned a mottled red. Briggs started moving, his eyes fixed on Elias, but before he could take 2 steps, a dozen residents, men and women who had suffered in silence for years, rose from their seats, forming an impromptu barrier. Old Man Hemlock, his back straight, stood shoulder to shoulder with the Devises, their children now grown. This is defamation, Sterling shrieked, pounding her gavel. This meeting is adjourned. But no one moved. The residents, finally seeing the truth, refused to be silenced. Just then, the heavy oak doors of the community hall swung open. General Harding stood there, flanked by 3 grim-faced FBI agents. The air crackled with authority. Victoria Sterling, Marcus Briggs, Mayor Randall Finch, Harding's voice boomed, cutting through the din. I'm U.S. Mine. Attorney Maxwell Harding. You are all under arrest for charges including conspiracy, fraud, extortion, and abuse of public office. An accountant gun. Sterling's carefully constructed composure shattered. Briggs, for the first time, looked truly stunned, his eyes darting wildly. Mayor Finch, who had been trying to blend into the background, sagged against the wall. What followed was a cascade of confessions. Rebecca Morales, the timid former HOA treasurer, stepped forward, her hands shaking but her voice gaining strength as she detailed years of financial manipulation. Elias played more videos. Briggs, in a moment of arrogance, admitting on camera to having planted a pest infestation in the Davises' home to force them out. Sarah Chen presented a mountain of evidence, proving the link between Azure Coast Resorts and the systematic land grab. One by one, residents stood up, sharing their stories of intimidation, of fines, of lost homes. The Johnsons, an elderly couple, tearfully described how their beloved front porch swing, a gift from their grandchildren, had been declared a new approved fixture and forcibly removed. The town librarian, a quiet woman named Eleanor Vance, recounted how her rare book collection, a source of solace and pride, had been threatened as a fire hazard if she didn't comply with an arbitrary storage rule. The fear, so carefully cultivated by Sterling and Briggs, evaporated, replaced by a fierce, collective anger. As the handcuffs clicked around Briggs' wrists, Elias caught his eye. The warden's expression was no longer one of cruel amusement, but of utter, bewildered defeat. He was just a bully, stripped of his power. Sterling, her face ashen, was led away, her empire crumbling around her. The aftermath was a tidal wave of justice. Sterling and Briggs faced federal charges, their carefully constructed web of corruption unraveling under the weight of irrefutable evidence. Mayor Finch resigned in disgrace, his political career and reputation destroyed. The Oakhaven Lighthouse was declared a protected historical landmark, its beacon shining as a symbol of the town's resilience. The public beach access was permanently enshrined in town bylaws. Oakhaven underwent a profound transformation. A new HOA board was elected, comprised of longtime residents, committed to transparency and community welfare. Elias and Sarah, along with General Harding, established the Oakhaven Preservation Alliance, a nonprofit dedicated to protecting other coastal communities from similar corporate exploitation. Its mission: to provide legal aid, investigative resources, and community organizing strategies to fight against corporate land grabs disguised as development. 6 months after the fateful HOA meeting, the town gathered for a celebration. Not just for the new democratically elected HOA, nor for the arrests, but for something far more personal. In the center of the town square, under a sky painted with the hues of a coastal sunset, sat the sea serpent. Every splintered plank had been replaced, every scar repaired, its wooden hull gleaming with fresh varnish. The entire community had chipped in, helping Elias restore his father's boat. As the crowd cheered, Elias and Clara pushed the boat towards the newly rebuilt boat launch. The air was thick with the smell of salt and fresh paint, a stark contrast to the acrid scent of sawdust and destruction from months ago. Young children, free from the fear of noise violations, ran along the boardwalk, their laughter echoing. "You know, Dad," Elias said to his father's memory, his hand resting on the smooth, cool wood of the mast. "Sometimes the biggest battles aren't fought with bombs and bullets. Sometimes they're fought with spreadsheets and subpoenas." The community watched as Elias, with Clara by his side, launched the sea serpent into the calm waters of Oakhaven Harbor. It glided effortlessly, a symbol of hope and rebirth. As the boat bobbed gently, Elias looked out at the faces of his neighbors, no longer fearful, but united. "I spent my life disarming threats," Elias later told Sarah, watching the last rays of sun glint off the water. "But the most dangerous threats aren't always the ones that explode. Sometimes, they're the quiet ones, the ones that steal your home, your history, your community, one rule at a time." The sea serpent became more than just a fishing boat. It became a floating monument to Oakhaven's courage, a reminder that even the smallest, most personal battles can ignite a movement. And across the nation, as other communities began to hear Oakhaven's story, the tide began to turn. The Oakhaven Preservation Alliance, born from the splinters of a single boat, became a beacon, guiding others to reclaim their dignity, expose the darkness, and find their own way home.